life transitions, becoming a parent. And if you watch to the end, there are 3 strategies that I wish I had implemented. Hi, I'm Kerry, helping you and me live our best autistic lives. Let's get into it. First and foremost, the first couple of years becoming a new parent is exhausting and wonderful. At the time I had my son, I was undiagnosed autistic. And for me, the unpredictable nature of a baby was incredibly hard to come to terms with. Very often, I just felt completely and utterly overwhelmed, which is exacerbated by the lack of sleep in the beginning with a new baby. So for me, I needed my son to be in a 4-hour routine. And this meant that I knew at those specific times when he should be awake and doing things with him, when he should be asleep, and when he should be eat. Because I have read that people can determine between a hungry cry, an angry cry, an upset cry. They were all just noise to me, so I didn't know. But if I did a 4-hour routine, then it meant if he cried at this time, I knew what it was. You know, yes, I did learn very quickly that if he cried, it was generally feeding or cleaning. But having or knowing that in that 4-hour period, there was time when he was asleep, when I had time to myself, when it was quiet, was the only way I could cope. And I really struggled with postnatal depression. So I'm very aware that there are parts of that period of time that the only memories I have are photographs. I can remember that after having my son, and I had a cesarean, so I was in hospital for a week, and I can remember that the surging hormones were incredibly overwhelming, and I fixated on the idea that I can remember sobbing. I literally was standing in the hospital at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and everybody was asleep and the nurses were in their quiet space, but I just became incredibly scared that mentally I was already struggling and he was 4 days old, and I became fixated on the idea that if I said anything about my mental health, my son would be taken away from me. And so I kind of fixated on this idea, and so didn't ask for help, because I was aware that if I did, then I already knew what would happen. Even though that wouldn't have happened, I really fixated on the idea, which kept me silent for way too long. I think one of the hardest things was kind of teaching a child to self-soothe. I find that quite difficult because the level of crying, I now know that if I had a noise cancelling headphones, it would have made it easier, because I could still hear, but not all of the noise. I never even considered it. You know, I didn't even know such a thing existed at the time. But I definitely think that would have helped. Another thing I never did was I never actually heated baby food or heated milk. So I was aware that, you know, lots of people have views on this, but I figured if I didn't heat it, so it was at room temperature, then not always particularly good at regulating my own heat or knowing if something is too hot or too cold. So by not heating it and just having it at room temperature meant that my son always behaved in the same way, irrespective of whether we were home or out, because it was the same temperature of food. I didn't have to get milk to the correct temperature. I just gave it to him. But I think the transition from having freedom of time to not having freedom of my own time. So, you know, when I was a single person, if I was working, yes, I needed to go to work, but there was time in my day where I had control over what I did with it. Whereas when you're a new parent, the baby's completely dependent on you and you can't escape it. So I was aware we didn't have family particularly close, and so it was me and the kid every day, which is quite a lot to deal with. And, you know, I wish nobody suffered with postnatal depression, but it just doesn't work like that. And I'm very aware that there are certain periods of time when the depression was so bad that I don't actually remember them. So I remember photographs that were taken during that time, but actually what happened in that time, I don't know. And yet, I think I found there's a lot of expectation. I think some of it we put on ourselves, and some of it is societal, or we try and compare ourselves as a parent to somebody else as a parent, and that just doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I think the thing that came into this was breastfeeding. So breastfeeding is good. Yes, breastfeeding is good. Breastfeeding is good if you produce enough milk that your baby is satisfied. And breastfeeding is good, but if you have mastitis and can't actually feed your baby, there's a lot of guilt that comes with that somehow you're letting your child down. But in reality, you need to do what's right for your family. And what's right for you might look different to what was right for me. You know, I could only breastfeed for 6 weeks, and initially I felt like I was the worst mother in the world because I couldn't breastfeed, and I hated it. I just it was supposed to be really bonding. It really wasn't bonding. That really didn't work for me. And I didn't like the fact that you leak, and so no, I actually found it incredibly distasteful. But you know, I don't know whether it's a sensory thing or you know, whether I'm a prude, but just the whole it wasn't for me. I really bonded with my son when he started to talk, because up till then I didn't know what he needed. You know, I could do the 4-hour routines and I could do the basic cleaning, but I just didn't know. In fact, when I was pregnant, I actually said to my husband, you're going to have to play with him because I don't see the point of play. And 20 years on, I still struggle with play. I find it boring. I really don't see what the point is. And so we had to learn that. And I think the transition is more difficult because there are so many hormones involved. And on top of that, there's lack of sleep. And so lack of sleep for me magnifies all of the things I already struggle with. and feel overwhelmed by. But I wouldn't swap him for anything in the world. I think it's an amazing journey. And there's not really a manual. No, there's not really a manual. And yet, you know, I really wanted to have him. I love him to bits. But I felt like when I was pregnant, I had been taken over by an alien. Like my body and, you know, was all weird. And just, I think maybe it's a sensory thing, but experiencing all different things related to hormone changes while pregnant was really difficult, but he was worth every minute. And I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. Bonus strategies. First point to remember is good parenting starts with parents taking care of themselves. Good parenting is about dealing with your children with grace and giving yourself the same grace. Bonus tip number 2, plan time for yourself, whether that's during a nap time, but plan something that you enjoy doing, not just washing everything that needs to get washed and doing loads of chores while baby's asleep. Bonus tip number 3, ask for help. And if you need to, pay for it. But ask, because people will help. But unless you ask, you won't ever get any help. Click on the Life Transition playlist to watch more in this series.